Well, good evening, this is Hound Dog Steve, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and welcome back to my channel. And this evening, oh my God, the Brexit imbroglio. It just seems to get more and more insane by the day. So what has happened now is that the Supreme Court of England has ruled that the prorogation of Parliament by Boris Johnson was illegal, and that government was never prorogued, and it is now back in session. So what this does, these 11 unelected officials have basically taken away any idea of the Queen's prerogative to prorogue government. Now, this royal prerogative has been exercised by prime ministers for centuries, represent the Queen in government. That is all over now. We've handed that over to, as I say, 11 unelected officials. So what does that actually mean? What is going to come out of that? Now, I will attach the article that shows the whole of the court's rulings, and it is basically a whole bunch of legalese, just giving the reasons why they felt they had the right to interfere in the process of government or to overrule the Queen's ruling. So in their ruling, the Supreme Court said that Boris Johnson lied to the Queen about his reasons for proroguing government, so that Parliament would not have enough time to discuss the Brexit exit deal, and so they are back sitting. And, you know, at the end of the day, the extra week that Boris Johnson was getting from the prorogation, even if he'd won, I don't think would have made any difference, because the House now, with the help of John Bercow, the Speaker, who is a Remainer, and of course, basically the bulk of Parliament and the senior civil service are Remainers. And so, as I say, with the help of John Bercow, the rebels are now in charge of the House. They will not permit another election. They've turned down Boris Johnson's vote of no confidence, which of course he taunted them about in the first day of government sitting after the court ruling, and said, okay, let's have an election. But you see, the opposition don't want an election because they will lose the election. So now we basically have a sitting duck prime minister who effectively can't do anything, and the rebels, as I say, in charge of government. They could bring forward a motion that would end Article 50, the exit clause from the EU. And of course, adding insult to injury, all of this was done at the cost of the taxpayer. And this is why the taxpayers, or the residents of England, are so angry at this whole situation. 3 years of waffling. And so, yes, they can end Article 50, they can shut this whole thing down, they can do any number of things, and Boris Johnson pretty much has to stand there and let it happen. So, as I've said before, you know, the EU and the globalists love to have unelected officials taking care of business and the public out of the picture. And of course, you know, even though they may get their way, I think the payback could easily come in the next election, because instead of softening, the people of Britain, their attitudes have hardened towards this issue. And from what I heard recently, talking to some friends actually in England, is that even people who wanted to remain are now prepared to vote to leave just to punish the government and the opposition for the messing around and the indiscriminate waste of money that's being borne by the taxpayer. I mean, it's absolutely unconscionable. The other thing that I found absolutely interesting about all of this is the way that the argument has shifted. Now, it is true that Boris Johnson tried to hobble the government, but the government have tried to hobble the Conservatives and the Brexit plan for the last 3 years. And this is what's been overlooked by the court ruling. They have completely forgotten that they have ignored the will of the public. And we have had basically everybody in the land, from George Soros to American financial interests, to try and bring about the end of this deal. I mean, it is absolutely stunning, you know, the opposition by corporations and these high officials. And of course the political class are hoping that they can wear down the 17.5 million in Britain who voted to leave the EU. But again, as I say, their position seems to be hardening, not softening against the government. So it will be very interesting indeed. And another indication of the complete loss of the democratic process. Okay, well, let's go over and take a look at these articles, and then we'll come back and I'll do a quick wrap up. Okie dokie, here we go. And this from The Guardian. Johnson's suspension of Parliament unlawful, Supreme Court rules. Judges rule unanimously that PM's decision to prorogue Parliament can be examined by judges. The Supreme Court has ruled that Boris Johnson's advice to the Queen that Parliament should be prorogued for 5 weeks at the height of the Brexit crisis was unlawful. The unanimous judgment from 11 justices on the UK's highest court followed an emergency 3-day hearing last week that exposed fundamental legal differences over interpreting the country's unwritten constitution. The momentous decision was read out by Lady Hale, President of the Supreme Court. Unusually, none of the parties were provided with advanced copies of the judgment due to its sensitivity. Only 7 of the 11 justices who had heard the case were present in court. And here is the full ruling here, and I will leave this link below. It'll be to the newspaper, so just scroll down a little bit and you'll find the court ruling. The first legal question the judges had to resolve was whether the Prime Minister's decision exploiting residual royal prerogative powers was justiciable and could consequently be subjected to scrutiny by the courts. And you'll see as you read through this, it is just a whole bunch of legal gobbledygook. This from the Daily Mail. Boris Johnson warns Supreme Court judges not to enter the political arena by blocking suspension of Parliament, as government refuses to rule out proroguing again if it loses the case. Boris Johnson yesterday warned Britain's most senior judges not to intervene in his decision to suspend Parliament, as government lawyers admitted he could do it again. The Prime Minister has given an undertaking to comply with any ruling by the Supreme Court to recall MPs. But Lord Keane, QC, a Justice Minister who is representing Mr Johnson at the Supreme Court, refused to rule out a second prorogation of Parliament if the court decides the first was unlawful. And as I said, the extra week that it would gain really doesn't resolve anything anyway, so I don't see any point in that, just another waste of money. And this from RT. PM Boris Johnson's suspension of Parliament was unlawful, UK Supreme Court. The UK Supreme Court has ruled that British Prime Minister Boris Johnson acted unlawfully when he decided to prorogue, suspend Parliament for 5 weeks, plunging Britain into a constitutional crisis. President of the UK Supreme Court, Lady Hale, delivering the judgment on Tuesday, said that Johnson's advice to Her Majesty, the Queen, was unlawful, void and of no effect. All 11 judges were unanimous in ruling that the UK Parliament ostensibly had not been prorogued and the Prime Minister prevented lawmakers from carrying out their duties. And it is this comment here by Lady Hale which is extremely interesting and extremely revealing. In what was essentially a damning indictment of Johnson's judgment as British PM, Lady Hale explained that the effects on the fundamentals of democracy was extreme with this unlawful act. And I wonder about the fundamentals of democracy being called out by unelected officials, unelected judges. What effect on the fundamentals of democracy has that? Unbelievable. They're so blind. They're so blind to their own disregard for democracy and what democracy really means, because they live in their own echo chamber, their own little bubble, and so they can't discern right from wrong anymore. They have no idea, really no idea. And that's the scariest part of all of this, my friends. RT again. Boris Johnson calls Parliament paralysed and taunts the opposition over boos and cries of resign. UK PM Boris Johnson said he believes the Supreme Court was wrong to rule his decision to prorogue a paralysed government and accused the opposition of sabotaging Brexit as shouts and boos rocked the House. In a raucous statement to the Commons on Wednesday, a day after the UK's highest court ruled his suspension of Parliament unlawful, void and of no effect, Johnson spent minutes haranguing the opposition before addressing the court decision, defying calls to resign and daring MPs to call a no-confidence vote on a general election. Johnson slammed the opposition politicians for 3 years of dither and delay and said they wanted the country to be locked forever in the orbit of the EU. The PM reiterated that he wanted to strike a deal with Brussels before October the 31st deadline, but that he was willing to leave without a deal if necessary. But listen to this. Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn called Johnson's speech 10 minutes of bluster from a dangerous PM who thinks he's above the law but is not fit to hold office. Corbyn said the verdict represents an extraordinary and precarious moment in history. And here we are. We demand democracy, the incredible sulk. And of course the truth of the matter is it's Jeremy Corbyn and people like him who think they are above the law and not fit to hold office. They have completely defied the British public. And you know, this is going to come back and haunt, because I came across this, and it says even chimps have a sense of fairness. Humans aren't the only one who cry no fair in a classic test of fairness called the ultimatum game. Apes will dole out an equitable share of their bananas, and when they don't, their partners will complain, a new study shows. And there you go. There is a wonderful picture of the British government. Right there. A bunch of chimpanzees frustrating the public. Well, be warned that even chimpanzees know when they've been handed a bill of goods. And as I say, the anger of the public will be felt in the next election. Have no fear. Now, interesting enough, I think that the Brexit deal and, of course, the yellow vests in France may turn out to be to our advantage as to showing up exactly what the globalist agenda is. Now, you know, you and I, any number of people could sit in a back room somewhere and discuss the committing of some kind of crime, a robbing of a bank or something like that, and we could do that for 20 years, and there is no real big deal. The important time are the 5 minutes that you spend in the bank, because the cat is out of the bag, everyone knows exactly what you're doing, and there's no pulling that back, there's no pretending anymore. Well, the rollout of the globalist agenda has been going on basically under wraps since the EU was formed back in the 70s. And so many of these things, this was a sort of underlying preparation of the rollout of the globalist agenda, and many people did not know or could not see exactly where this was going. Well, we're now in the bank, and it's taken much longer than they anticipated. I think they believed that everybody would just jump on board and it would be no problem at all, or that they had enough barriers that they would prevent any kind of public acrimony. And as we've seen, this is why the move towards populism is because more and more people, as it's being revealed by the EU, as they say, and this Brexit issue, as to what the world might look like under a globalist style government. And as I've described it before, it is absolute control over absolutely everything. So the length of time that this has taken has given everybody the wake-up call, and I think that you are going to see that the populist movement is going to continue. I think the next election in England is going to be absolutely brutal, and I think the voters are really going to punish all of the parties for behaving unconscionably against the best public interest. Anyway, I am hoping against hope for a miracle. Now, I can't seem to find the piece of information. I did read this somewhere a little while back, but that basically it doesn't matter what the British Parliament decides within government unless they vote to end Article 50 on October 31st. Unless they get an extension, and the EU has said there will be no more extensions, that on October the 31st the Brexit will be triggered and Britain will be out of Europe. We only have a month before that date, and of course it'll be fascinating to see how this plays out. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe below, and in the meantime, this is Hound Dog Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant evening, and we'll talk to you very, very shortly. See you now. Bye.